Thanks, Sam. I'd like to do two things, but I promise I'll stick to the time limit, so I may stop in the middle of the second one. The first one has to do with the kind of natural history of ideas about counterinsurgency as we go through a couple of these wars and start to think about structuring a military for what might come next. We've been through a pretty severe pendulum swing from a view early in the Iraq conflict that basically held that this was about violence, coercion, what the military refers to as kinetic activity. That was thought not to have worked out so well. And partly as a result of the publication of the new manual that John was so closely associated with, we then had a fairly comprehensive pendulum swing to the other end, where at least in intellectual circles where people were thinking about counterinsurgency as independent from the bureaucratics of getting a large institution to do it, the view swung hard over to an emphasis on hearts and minds, political development, governance reform. That, I think, reached its apogee in the early McChrystal years in Afghanistan, and I think has now radically spent. And we're in the process of swinging back to something very close to the early Iraq view that basically holds that success and failure in this kind of conflict, insurgency, wars on terrorists, is essentially a matter of killing. It's a matter of killing the right people, killing as few as possible of the wrong people, but all this business about nation building and governance reform is impossible, it's unachievable, we shouldn't do it, and instead we should focus on doing what we do right, which is drone strikes, special forces raids, small footprint training missions that are basically about teaching the local military to be more effective at the traditional military tasks. And I think we're in substantial danger of ending up in a significant violation of the Clausewitzian principles that I think most Americans in this community continue to emphasize. That if violence is to be a sensible means of statecraft, it has to be tied to some sort of political outcome. That you're using violence and you're killing people in order to create a political change of some kind somewhere. Now, the kind of unwashed, simplistic version of the Hearts and Minds School set up way too ambitious a set of political changes that is probably beyond the reach of any plausible American use of violence to accomplish in the developing world. That doesn't mean that it makes sense to simply use force or train other people to do it without some conception of what sort of political purpose or outcome or end state this is supposed to bring about. And I think we find this problem biting us hard today in Afghanistan, and we'll shortly see it biting us hard in Yemen, in Somalia, in Syria, and elsewhere. In Afghanistan, with the exception of an unrealistically ambitious view that the Bush administration held mostly implicitly, there's never been a clear articulation of what political outcome in Afghanistan we can live with. The Obama administration has been fairly clear that they thought that their predecessors were after too much. They've never been very clear on how little we can settle for. And what's happened in practice without ever articulating that, and I don't think it's been articulated even on the inside, in addition to just public statements in the public square, is that we've gradually been retreating to an acceptance of less and less and less, without an argument about why this can still actually secure the aims that we have been fighting the war for. And I think we're in danger of very quickly, if we have not already, getting ourselves into a position where we backed into getting so little that it's no longer worth the sacrifice of lives and dollars that we're making in order to do anything at all. Now, I tried in a foreign affairs piece a couple of years ago that I co-authored with some much smarter folks than I, Fotini Christia and Alex Thier, to articulate what we thought the minimum acceptable political outcomes would be. I think as we go through this kind of inevitable pendulum swing from soft to hard approaches to counterinsurgency, ideally what you'd like is as you go through iteration after iteration after iteration, the amplitude of the swings would get smaller, and the attention to kind of synthetic middle grounds grow. And where I would like that attention to come to rest is an articulation of how can you relate smaller uses of force to real, meaningful, attainable political change in a theater that can actually meet the national interests of the nation that's using the violence, and especially us. And I'll just throw out one anecdote on this score before I shift grounds, and Sam's going to have to flag me or I'll go on too long. There's a fashionable view in DC at the moment that special forces raids and CT is all we really need in South Asia. And that's all we really need from Afghanistan. And as long as we can maintain bases, probably in the northern part of the country, to conduct these kinds of raids against high-value targets that we care about, that's all we really need. And we can live with whatever else happens around that. And I find it remarkable how infrequently Afghans' perspectives on this agenda are part of the conversation here. Most Afghans that I've talked to view this agenda as, you Americans want to fly around at 10,000 feet, bomb people you don't like, while Afghanistan burns down underneath it. Why is there anything in this for us? And why should we help you? If that's all you care about, and what happens to us is of so little consequence, well, I'm not sure we're particularly interested in giving you the bases that you want to conduct these missions. If we don't think creating Switzerland and the Hindu Kush is obviously a silly ambition, and if anyone ever held it, they should have been impeached. But if we have no articulation of what political outcome we can live with, we're probably not going to get even the opportunity to engage in kinetic activity that so many in this town at the moment are focusing on almost to the exclusion of all of us. The intersection of what force can do to change politics is what this whole conversation has to be about, whether it's going to be about large footprint going using hundreds of thousands of conventional troops, or whether it's going to be about drone raids and special forces 12-person teams training or targeting or killing or doing the collection of things that special forces do. It has to be about something or another that happens with respect to what we, at one time in Afghanistan, what governments reform or political change. Do I have any time left, or am I
Pretty much over, but a little bit.
I was going to talk about the prognosis in Afghanistan. I'll only just flag that I have historically been guardedly optimistic, but in the optimistic camp on Afghanistan. And I am on the verge of becoming substantially pessimistic about the prognosis. And I'll just flag that. And we'll return to it. We can return to it if people want, but I'll